In 1977, a 10-year-old girl wrote a letter to Pepsi. She didn't know it, but that letter would change the way America drinks forever. Sometimes the most powerful forces in history come wrapped in the most innocent packages. A letter, written in crayon, by a child who simply wanted something different. This is the story of how one piece of paper, no more than a few sentences long, changed the trajectory of one of the world's most iconic companies and shifted the course of an entire industry. Because when a young girl sat down to write to a soda company, she had no idea she was about to trigger a chain of events that would reach into every corner store, every restaurant, every home in America. Her name was Patty. She was 10 years old. And she had a problem that millions of Americans shared, but nobody had quite put into words the way she did. The bottles were too big, too heavy, too much. In an era when soft drinks came almost exclusively in glass bottles that held either 10 or 16 ounces, when families bought cases that weighed as much as a small child, when refrigerator space was precious and waste was common, Patty did something revolutionary. She picked up a pencil, she found a piece of paper, and she wrote directly to PepsiCo headquarters with a simple request: make smaller bottles. Bottles that kids like her could actually finish. Bottles that made sense. The 1970s were a strange time for American consumption. The country was caught between two worlds. On one side, the post-war abundance mentality still ruled. Bigger was always better. Supersized portions meant value. Waste was just part of the American dream. Families bought in bulk because that was progress, that was prosperity, that was the future everyone had been promised. But cracks were starting to show. The energy crisis had hit, environmental consciousness was rising. People were beginning to question whether endless growth and endless consumption were really sustainable, whether bigger actually was better, whether there might be another way. Into this uncertain landscape came the soft drink industry, riding high on decades of explosive growth. Coca-Cola and Pepsi had transformed from regional novelties into global empires, their bottles as recognizable as any symbol in human history. They had fought wars over fountain rights, over shelf space, over the hearts and minds of consumers. They had survived Prohibition, the Depression, 2 world wars. They had become part of the fabric of American identity itself. But they were about to face a challenge they had never anticipated. Not from a competitor, not from a new technology, not from changing regulations. From a child who saw what they could not. When Patty's letter arrived at PepsiCo headquarters in Purchase, New York, it could easily have been dismissed. Companies receive thousands of letters from customers every week. Most get filed away, answered with a form letter, forgotten within days. But something about this one was different. Maybe it was the handwriting. Maybe it was the crayon. Maybe it was the absolute clarity of the request coming from someone so young. Or maybe, just maybe, it landed on exactly the right desk, at exactly the right moment, read by exactly the right person who understood that this child had identified something profound. Because Patty was not wrong. American families were drowning in soda they did not finish. Parents bought large bottles because that was what was available, what was economical, what made sense by the mathematics of the grocery store. But children could not drink 16 ounces in one sitting. The bottles sat in refrigerators, going flat. They got poured down sinks. The waste was enormous but invisible, hidden in millions of homes across the country, never calculated, never questioned. It was just how things were. Until a 10-year-old girl decided it didn't have to be. What happened next was not immediate. Large companies do not pivot on a dime, especially when pivoting means challenging decades of established practice. But Patty's letter began circulating through the corridors of PepsiCo. It reached product development teams, market research departments, executive suites, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, minds began to change. Because once you see what Patty saw, you cannot unsee it. Once someone points out that the emperor has no clothes, the illusion crumbles. PepsiCo began to investigate. They ran focus groups, they studied consumption patterns, they analyzed waste. And they discovered that Patty was not alone. Millions of Americans were struggling with the same problem. They just had never thought to articulate it. While executives debated logistics and profits, Patty was probably doing her homework, completely unaware she had started a revolution. The company faced a decision that would define its future. They could continue doing what they had always done, riding the momentum of decades of success. Or they could listen to a child and fundamentally rethink their approach to product sizing. It sounds simple now, obvious even, but in 1977, this was revolutionary. No major soft drink company had ever seriously considered offering significantly smaller individual serving sizes. The economics seemed wrong, the logistics seemed impossible, the cultural expectations seemed unmovable. But PepsiCo decided to take the risk. They began developing what would become the 12-ounce can as a mainstream individual serving option, alongside smaller bottle formats. Not the first 12-ounce can ever made, but the first time a major company fully committed to it as a core product line rather than a novelty. They redesigned production facilities, they retooled distribution networks, they reimagined marketing strategies, and in doing so, they opened a door that would change everything. Because once PepsiCo committed to smaller sizes, Coca-Cola had no choice but to follow. And when both giants moved, the entire industry shifted beneath their feet. The transformation was seismic. Within 5 years, the American soft drink landscape was unrecognizable. Smaller cans and bottles proliferated. Variety packs became standard. The concept of right sizing, of matching product size to actual consumption patterns, spread from soft drinks to juices to sports drinks to bottled water. Refrigerators got more organized, waste decreased, consumer choice exploded, and it all traced back to that letter, to that moment when a child saw what the adults could not. But the ripples extended far beyond just beverage containers. The shift towards smaller, more convenient sizes became a template for product innovation across industries. Food companies began offering single-serve packages. Snack manufacturers rethought portion control. The entire concept of individual versus family size was reimagined. Market researchers started paying attention to what children said, recognizing that kids often saw inefficiencies and absurdities that adults had learned to accept. The voice of the young consumer, once dismissed, became valuable, crucial even. By the 1990s, the 12-ounce can had become the dominant form factor for soft drink consumption in America. Vending machines were built around it. Store shelves were organized for it. Marketing campaigns were designed for it. What began as a response to one girl's letter had become an industry standard, affecting billions of transactions every year. PepsiCo's revenues soared as they captured market share through better understanding of actual consumer needs. Their responsiveness to Patty's insight gave them a reputation for innovation that persists to this day. The numbers tell a staggering story. Americans now consume approximately 200 billion beverage cans every year. The vast majority are 12 ounces or smaller. If even 10% of that shift can be traced back to the cultural change initiated by the move towards smaller sizes in the late 70s and early 80s, we are talking about 20 billion cans annually, hundreds of billions over the decades since. That is the physical manifestation of one child's observation. That is the concrete, measurable impact of listening to a voice that should not have mattered, but did. Think about that for a moment. Every time you reach into a convenience store cooler and grab a can of soda, every time you see a variety pack in a grocery store, every time you appreciate having a size that actually matches what you want to drink, you are experiencing the echo of Patty's letter. You are living inside the butterfly effect she triggered.
A 10-year-old girl, armed with nothing but honesty and a crayon, reshaped a billion-dollar industry because she dared to say what everyone else was thinking but nobody was saying. There is something profound in that, something that speaks to the nature of change itself, to how innovation really happens, to where the best ideas actually come from. They do not always emerge from boardrooms or research labs.
Sometimes they come from people living with the problems, those too young or too new to accept that this is just how things are done. Patty didn't know about market research or product development cycles. She just knew that the bottles were too big and that there should be smaller ones. That clarity, that directness, that refusal to accept unnecessary inconvenience changed the world. So the next time you open a perfectly sized can of your favorite drink, remember Patty, the girl who asked for something smaller and ended up changing something much bigger. History isn't just made by presidents or inventors. It's made by anyone brave enough to say, this could be better. Because sometimes one voice, one letter, really can transform a nation. If this story made you see the world differently, if it reminded you that small actions can have enormous consequences, hit that like button. Subscribe for more true stories of how tiny moments changed everything. Because the butterfly effect isn't just a theory. It's the hidden architecture of history, still unfolding right now in ways we can't yet see. The question is, will you be the next person to write the letter that changes everything?